Hey everyone, welcome back to another late night dive into Reddit's creepiest corners. Today's lineup is disturbing, shocking, so grab a drink, grab a snack, get comfy, and let's get into these twisted Reddit stories. Oh, and if you enjoy these stories, smash that like button and subscribe. You don't want to miss what's coming next. The 5-second rule had a different meaning at my house. When my parents began to get old, they started having difficulties getting around the house, cleaning, doing the chores, etc. After taking the time to contemplate, they decided that they were going to sell the house and move in somewhere more elderly friendly. My brother and I wanted to object. We had grown up in that old farmhouse, and coming back home to visit on the holidays to spend time with the whole family together was always the highlight of the year. So many memories and traditions were made in that house, and it pained me to think that there would ever be a time when my mom and dad weren't there, waiting for us to come back home to visit. They could sense our dismay, so before the house was sold, they arranged for us to come back and have one last family dinner in that house. And that was the plan. Dinner, watch a movie, and take one last photo of us together in front of the house. My brother bought a plane ticket and arranged for me to pick him up at the airport. Together, for the last time, we made the trip to where we grew up. It always surprised me how many memories can be tied to a single place. The smell of the house when you first walk in, the sound of my parents cooking dinner in the kitchen and bickering with each other. It was all as I had remembered it. Everything was in its place, and I was home again. I had walked past my brother who was on the couch petting the cat and made my way into the kitchen to see if my mom needed help with anything. She said yes, and asked if I could go down into the cellar and grab some more chicken broth for her, and of course, I said yes. As I was walking away, she stopped me, gave me a look that I had seen 1,000 times, and said, "Don't forget about the 5-second rule." That sentence alone carried a heavy load of nostalgia. When my brother and I were growing up, our parents would always tell us not to forget that rule. Every time, without fail, before going down into that old, dusty cellar, they reminded us of the rule. The rule was simple. When you enter the cellar, you must turn on the light bulb that was hanging in the center of the room. And when you were leaving the cellar, you had 5 seconds to make it to the top of the stairs after the light went out. They would never elaborate on why we had such a silly rule, or what would happen if you didn't follow it. When we were young, we didn't feel the need to second-guess our parents. After all, it was a simple rule, and we were always careful to adhere to it. Years passed, and nothing changed. There wasn't much to do down in the cellar, so we never really went down there. The only things there were gardening tools, some chemicals for cleaning, and a small pantry stocked with canned foods. It certainly wasn't a place for kids to play around in, which was why I assumed my parents made up the rule to begin with. They didn't want us down there, so they fabricated the ominous-sounding 5-second rule, which did a great job of deterring us. Kids are imaginative, and when we were young, we could only guess at what could be down there. I had propped the cellar door open and made my way down the long set of old, wooden steps, using the faint light emanating from atop the stairs to navigate downwards to the small hanging light bulb in the center of the room, and quickly pulled on its chain to turn it on. I was a little surprised to find that the light still worked, as I was sure my elderly parents didn't come down here that often. Going from the house to the cellar was always quite surreal. One moment you were in a warm, nostalgic environment, and the next, you were surrounded by claustrophobic concrete walls that seemed to creep in closer to you the longer you were in there. The air was stale, like all of it had been inhaled and exhaled long ago. A tall off-white cabinet at the far end of the cellar stood tall. It served as a pantry for food items that had a long shelf life and weren't used often enough to warrant them being stocked in the pantry upstairs. To its right, stacks on stacks of boxes filled that entire corner of the cellar. As a kid, whenever I did go down into that dark cellar, I was never alone. My brother always came with me, and I always came with him. While one of us grabbed whatever we came down there for, the other would stand watch. The person on watch would use their eyes to scan all the possible places a monster would hide in. When I was on watch, I would look at the boxes full of junk in the corner of the room and pray that I didn't see movement between the cracks. My brother would always watch the stairs, hoping that nothing would grab at our feet from the darkness below as we raced to the top. Being young and impressionable, we actually believed that there could be something down there, waiting for us to slip up, or for the light to go out. I opened the dusty cabinet and began to dig through its contents. Once I got to the bottom shelf, I found what I was looking for, hidden in the very back, behind layers of other cans. With the broth in my hand, I turned around, and the light went out, filling the cellar with darkness. Startled, I took a couple steps back, but was stopped when I bumped into one of the many stacks of boxes in the corner of the cellar. The towers of cardboard shook, and a few boxes fell to the ground, spilling their contents as they toppled. Not that I could see anything. The dark was all-encompassing and all-consuming. 5. I counted in my head as I tried to steady myself and slow my breathing. I took a small step forward in the direction of the light bulb. I heard the boxes behind me shift. 4. I felt a gentle tug on the sleeve of my shirt. It was almost imperceptible with how slight it was. I probably wouldn't have noticed, but with all of my nerves on high alert, I felt everything. 3. I took another step forward, but my arm was pulled back, stopping me in my tracks. My heart hammered in my chest, and I could feel every beat. I remember yelling, "Let go!" as I ripped my arm away. The grip was released, sending me tumbling towards the center of the room. 2. I stood back up as quickly as I could, facing the stacks of boxes in the corner of the room. In an instant, the hanging light bulb flickered back into view, illuminating my brother's face as he said, "Boo." What followed was a mixture of anger and relief as I attempted to scold him. My words were drowned out by his laughter, and I don't think he heard a single thing I said. Neither of us turned off the light, and together we walked up those long wooden steps, back into the warm and familiar house that we grew up in. My brother swung the cellar door closed and guided the bolt into its metal sheath. It never occurred to me to question why exactly the cellar had a lock on the outside. There was nothing in there, so why have a lock? We were back in the kitchen, and my brother was telling our mom all about how he scared me senseless in the cellar. I couldn't help but smile. "That's all it took," he said. I turned the light off, and he started yelling. "No, don't lie. If you hadn't snuck around behind the boxes, I wouldn't have yelled like that," I said. My brother only doubled down on what he said. "Okay, now you are lying. I didn't go anywhere near those boxes. You just started freaking out and flailing around in the dark after I killed the lights." "You didn't grab me from behind the boxes?" I asked. I couldn't tell if he was lying or not. Even if one of us was lying, neither of us broke character. My brother picked up on the seriousness in my tone and dropped his smile. "No," he said. "I turned the light off, and you lost it." By that point, we were just staring at each other, trying to tell if the other person was lying or not. Even our mom looked uncomfortable. After dinner, we took a photo in front of the house, and that was the last time I saw that place with my own eyes. My brother flew home, and I made the long drive back to my place. The house was sold shortly thereafter. I can only hope that my parents told the new buyers about the rule. I found a box of my things in my boyfriend's closet. I never gave them to him. It started with the sweater, a simple navy blue pullover I thought I'd lost months ago. It was folded neatly on the top shelf of my boyfriend's closet, and I only noticed it because I was hunting for a blanket while he was in the shower. I pulled it down, frowning. "Hey, Nick," I called out, holding it up as he came back into the room, toweling his hair. "Isn't this my sweater? I thought I lost it." Nick froze for just a second, then shrugged. "Oh, yeah, you left it here ages ago. I forgot to mention it." It was a reasonable explanation, but something about the way he said it didn't sit right. I didn't remember ever bringing that sweater to his place. That nagging feeling stayed with me over the next few days. It wasn't like Nick to keep secrets. We'd been dating for 2 years, and while we had our ups and downs, I trusted him. But this felt different. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me. I waited until Nick was out running errands, then went back to his closet. The sweater was still on the shelf, but as I scanned the other items, I noticed something odd. A plain cardboard box tucked in the corner, partially hidden by a stack of old shoes. My name was scrawled on the lid. Heart pounding, I pulled the box out and opened it. Inside was a collection of things that were unmistakably mine. A hairbrush I hadn't seen in over a year. A photo of me from high school that I'd lost when I moved out of my parents' house. A necklace my best friend gave me for my birthday. The one I thought I'd dropped somewhere in the city. My stomach turned. These weren't things I could have accidentally left behind. They were items I hadn't seen in years, things I thought were gone forever. Then I found the notebook. It was a cheap, spiral-bound journal, one I used to carry around for doodling and writing grocery lists. Flipping through the pages, my throat tightened. The handwriting wasn't mine, it was Nick's. Page after page, he'd written down details about me. Things I liked, things I didn't, places I went, people I talked to. The final pages were the worst. They weren't about me anymore. They were about us. Things I hadn't even told him. Arguments we never had. Future plans I'd never agreed to. And at the very end, scrawled in a frantic, looping hand, was a single sentence, repeated over and over. "She'll understand eventually." I didn't hear Nick come back. By the time I looked up, he was standing in the doorway, staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before. "I told you to stay out of my closet," he said, his voice eerily calm. I tried to speak, to explain, but my words caught in my throat. Nick stepped closer, slowly closing the door behind him. "It's okay," he said softly. "Now we can finally talk about what's next." I thought my husband was the one licking my feet. I was wrong. My husband had a foot fetish. He even told me about it on our first date. And despite the fact that I was never too into feet myself, I appreciated that he was upfront about it and opened myself up to it over time. Not on the giving side, of course. I've always just personally found feet disgusting. But on the receiving side, which worked out perfectly, because my husband's particular foot fetish was licking toes. Yup, really getting in there with his tongue and slobbering all over each of my toes, one by one. Now, it took me years of exploring my husband's kink to build up enough tolerance not to burst out laughing from the tickling sensation within 30 seconds. And after 4 years of dating and nearly 10 years of marriage, I eventually became something of a pro at getting my feet licked and maintaining my composure. In fact, I got so good at it that whenever my husband would lick my toes, I could completely tune it out, often multitasking things like filing my nails, reading a book, and streaming a show as he licked away. Heck, sometimes I'd even fall asleep while he did it, which is why, on that fateful night in 2019, when I was lying in bed in the dark, my feet dangling off the mattress, and I began to feel a tongue slither its way up and down each and every one of my toes, I could not have been less bothered. Truth is, I probably wouldn't have even noticed that something was off, were it not for the fact that it felt as if my husband was trying a new technique, something that he had never implemented before in the 14 years that we had been together. The bite. Yes, after feeling him suck each and every one of my toes, I then proceeded to feel more intense pressure as I felt his teeth begin to clamp down on my feet. "Feeling adventurous?" I called out in the dark, before shaming him, as he sometimes asked me to do. "You're a naughty, naughty boy, and you're gonna pay for that." I reached over to my bedside table, opened its drawer, and removed a pair of handcuffs that he sometimes liked me to use on him after he was finished with my feet. "Don't make me restrain you," I called out again. But rather than play along and flirt back from the foot of the bed, as he always did, he suddenly stopped biting my feet. "Honey?" I asked. "Why'd you stop?" But he didn't reply. For a moment, there was only silence, until suddenly, I heard my husband's cell phone ringtone go off in the bathroom. Ring, ring. "You gonna get that?" I asked, but he continued to remain quiet, ignoring my question. "Fine, I'll get it," I said, as I hopped up from the bed and tiptoed through the dark, over to the bathroom, its door having been closed since I retired to the bedroom earlier that night. As I approached it, I couldn't help but notice that light was emanating from underneath the crack between the rug and the door. "Honey, you left the light on in the bathroom again," I called back to the bed as I began to open the bathroom door. "I'm gonna have to punish you even more." But before I could finish my sentence, my jaw dropped and I began to shake, as I saw my husband's lifeless body just lying there in the shower, its limbs mangled, its skin pale, as whatever blood remained in it poured down the drain. I simply froze as my mind began to race. If that's my husband, and he is dead, then who the fuck was just licking feet? I thought to turn around and stare back into the dark bedroom. But I was too terrified to see who might be standing behind me. So I opted to instead walk over to my husband's body and remove his cell phone from his pocket, which was still ringing, over and over and over again. Ring, ring. I looked down at the phone as I held it in my hand and saw an incoming call from an unknown number. I answered it. "Hello?" For a moment, there was silence, until a quiet, raspy voice simply whispered back, over the line, "I'm under the bed. Want to play some more?" Suddenly, chills ran down my spine, and my body went into fight or flight, as my heart began racing, and I began to hyperventilate. Not knowing what else to do, I gathered myself and in a single motion, turned around, darted into the bedroom, and ran for the hallway as I tried to slam the door behind me. But just before I was able to close it, I saw what looked like the silhouette of a man crawl out and block it from shutting as he writhed on the ground like an insect. And as I pushed and pushed, trying to keep whoever or whatever was in my bedroom from getting out, I saw his body wriggle a few inches more into the hallway and suddenly felt his tongue lick a single one of my toes. I screamed at the top of my lungs before stumbling back, turning around and running down the stairs as I saw whoever or whatever it was chase after me on his hands and knees. Slam. I stood there, outside my house, leaning against the door as my body shook and tears ran down my eyes before eventually willing myself to run to my car. As I backed out of my driveway and peeled off down the street, I looked back at the door, only to find that he never opened it, for some reason choosing not to chase after me. 30 minutes later, I was at the police station, reporting what had happened. And an hour after that, the cops were combing my house. But the strange figure who had killed my husband and licked my feet was gone. 5 years later, I still can't fall asleep at night unless I'm under the covers for fear of feeling a tongue lick my toes. And while I haven't stopped mourning my husband, if I ever date again, I think it's fair to say I could never date someone with a foot fetish again. I've tried to move past what happened, tried to move past the shocking events of that fateful night. But whenever I tell someone my story and they bring up the urban legend of the licked hand, I tell them it's no legend at all, and it licks feet too. My uncle has a strange set of rules. Animal abuse, I moved in with my uncle who had a strange set of rules. When I was 12, I was forced to spend a summer with my great-uncle Jeremy. You see, I was a bit of a troublemaker back in those days. My parents thought if I spent some time with my strict grouch of an uncle, I would somehow be rehabilitated. You can imagine how hard my eyes rolled when my mom and dad told me about their plan, but I was oblivious to the horrors I would endure that summer. Uncle Jeremy was somewhat of a mountain man. He lived in the remote wilderness of Montana's high pine forest. A homesteader through and through, he'd made a life where most people would go insane. Granted, Uncle Jeremy did seem a bit kooky to me at the time. My dad almost tossed me out of the car as we rolled into my uncle's mountain cabin. He didn't even wait for Uncle Jeremy to greet me at the door. I watched as Dad's little Prius made its way back down the long driveway and onto the unkempt dirt road. While I was a bit offended by how I'd just been abandoned, I was not envious of the long journey ahead of him. It took us almost 2 hours to traverse that nasty road. I was sure we'd be left stranded at one point or another. A Prius is no off-roading vehicle. The hybrid's taillights disappeared amongst the dense forest. My attention turned to the rickety wooden cabin. This house was not what you would imagine it to be. It wasn't the picturesque idea people have when they think of a log cabin. I could see the structure had been through a lot. The logs were weathered, faded by the hot Montana summer and the icy winter winds. I could tell that everything used in its construction was sourced from the surrounding forest. Likewise, no modern amenities were visible. No power lines, fire hydrants, or even a satellite dish. I knew then it would be a duller summer than I'd imagined. I lifted a hand to knock on the old door and stopped when I noticed a few deep scratch marks on its facade. Bears? I thought to myself. An uneasy feeling that I was being watched from the pines came over me. I cocked my head in the direction of the tree line. It felt like something was calling me over to the woods. The door squealed open and I returned my gaze to the cabin. In the passageway stood a gray-bearded man, the fibers in his beard long, greasy, and matted. His skin was old and weathered. I suspected the same reasoning as the cabin's. He looked at me through the gray film in his eyes. I'd never actually met Uncle Jeremy up until that point, but I'd heard stories about him from my father. My father had suffered the same fate as me the summer between 7th and 8th grade. He told me Uncle Jeremy was not a man to be trifled with. You listen to everything your Uncle Jeremy tells you. He is not a man you want to make angry. My father would lecture, but when I looked into the face of the withering man, I didn't sense an ounce of animosity. He almost seemed kind. Nothing resembled the ferocity my father had mentioned. "Hi, I'm Marcus." I outstretched my hand in the introduction, but he slapped it away before placing a hand over my mouth. "Shh, we don't say names here." He moved my head over to the side to make sure no one, or nothing, was listening. More of my father's description of my great-uncle came to mind. "Uncle Jeremy is a bit strange, but he has your best interest in mind. Try your best to ignore his lack of civility." His words were all starting to make sense now. Uncle Jeremy ushered me into the cabin, and I thought I heard him whisper my name as he pushed me inside. That is, until I turned to see the look of fear in his eyes. I knew then that the sound had drifted in on the early summer breeze. Somewhere beyond the tree line, the hairs on the back of my neck stood. "Is everything okay, Uncle Jeremy?" His open palm slapped my cheek as I spoke his name. "Damn it, kid! I told you no names!" he said through gritted teeth, before returning his gaze to the tree line. Almost like a dream, a faint voice slithered into the cabin. "Jerry, Memmy," the voice called. "What the hell is that?" I asked, but received no reply. Uncle Jeremy quickly slammed the door shut. "Rule number 1, no names!" I dropped my gaze at his reprimand. "Rule number 2, if you hear something strange, leave it be. Ignore it. You hear me?" I ponder his instructions before moving to question his logic. "Why? Not another word on the matter. Those are the rules. My only rules. You follow them, or I'll send you back to your little life in Boise, you hear me?" Just then my escape from homestead living became clear. Break a few rules here and there, and I'd be back in the gem state. I tried not to smile at the plot that was formulating in my mind. "Your room is down yonder." The old man pointed down a small hallway before leading me to it himself. We stepped into a small 10 by 10 room. I threw my backpack onto the bed and plopped down right beside it, giving a grunt of relief. "What do you think you're doing, kid?" This isn't some luxurious mountain retreat. I eyed the crumbling wooden walls. The understatement of the century, I thought to myself. We have work to do. He moved to the window and pushed open the shutters, taking in a lungful of pristine mountain air in the process. Beyond his gaze stood a 2-acre clearing in the forest. A mix of fields, more comparable to glorified gardens, and livestock, chickens, goats, and 1 cow. He turned to me and noted my disappointed face. "What, you think this was a free ride?" "No, we work for our food here," he said, with the first ounce of enjoyment I'd seen inch across his face. He pulled open a drawer on the nightstand. "I placed these here for you before you got here." I peered into the drawer to find some old torn overalls. "You put those on and meet me outside. There's a lot to get done around here. The faster we get it over with, the faster we can have ourselves a nice supper." Later that night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. All of my muscles were aching. Uncle Jeremy was not lying. Homestead living is not for the weak. We'd worked until the sun met the horizon, and this time of year in Montana, that was around 9:30 p.m. We'd weeded the fields, fed the chickens, and milked the dairy cow, whose name I found out to be Bessie, and done dozens upon dozens of other tasks that were not very enjoyable. The best thing about it was that Uncle Jeremy said we would do it all again the next day. I placed the pillow over my face, hoping that it would suffocate me. I was a beat dog that needed to be put out of its misery. The warmth of the plush fabric seemed to comfort me a bit, so I left it there as the night slowly started to wash over me. Just as I was about to fall into an uneasy night of sleep, I heard scratching from the other side of the wall. It was coming from outside. The sound was very faint. It almost reminded me of the time we had mice inside the walls back home. Only these walls were not hollow. They were solid lumber. I moved the pillow off to the side, making sure that nothing muted the scraping by my head. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The noise sounded rhythmic, as if someone was sending a message. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Whatever it was clawing deeper into the side of the cabin. The noisemaker was making the noise was too strong to be a mouse. A raccoon, maybe. Then the sound intensified to a loud, ear-piercing screech, like someone clawing at an old chalkboard. Screech, screech, screech. I shot to a seated position. It must have been a bear. Montana grizzlies scared the shit out of me. Part of the reason why I'd never come to meet Uncle Jeremy in the first place. I heard the same faint whisper that had come from the tree line earlier that day, only this time, instead of Uncle Jeremy's name, my name hissed through the cracks of the cabin. Ma Arcus. I looked at the shutters on the blong window, and my heart dropped when I saw something slowly pulling them open. "Uncle Jeremy!" I shouted. From down the hall, I heard a bedroom door smash open, followed by my room's door. Uncle Jeremy stood there holding his 22-inch hand, his eyes meeting mine, before noticing the slowly creeping shutters. He leaned the gun on the wooden wall before running over to the shutters and forcing them closed. He quickly locked the latch before turning to me. "Kid, I had 2 rules and you broke both of them the first night," he shouted at me while I made sense of what just happened. I was hoping that the more my uncle talked, the more the situation would clear up, but everything he said just made me more confused and, frankly, terrified. "Now you've done it, kid. It now knows our names. It's imprinted on us. You have no idea how hard it was to get rid of the last one." "It? The last one?" I thought. What are you talking about?" I quivered. "Never mind that. From now on, you keep these shutters locked here." He didn't have to tell me twice. The whole house is going to be locked down, and just so we're clear, If you hear me calling your name, it ain't me." "What the hell? What else could it be?" I thought, before I opened my mouth to ask a clarifying question. "What is it?" I said. "What's my second rule?" my uncle commanded. I pondered for a bit, before responding. "If I see something, leave it be." "That's right, leave it be. No more of this. We will not talk about it anymore. It will only encourage it." Suddenly, I no longer wanted to go through with my plot to get Uncle Jeremy to send me home. The next morning after breakfast, Uncle Jeremy and I stepped outside to inspect the side of the wall where the noise was coming from. Uncle Jeremy touted a gun belt today, a Magnum revolver in its sheath. When we gazed at the marks on the wall, I was sure that no grizzly had created the noise. These scratches were not random like the ones on the door. No, these markings were indeed a message. Drawn on the wooden logs was a cryptic symbol, a circle with 3 jagged lines drawn through it. On top of this circle were 2 names, Jeremy and Marcus. I gulped as Uncle Jeremy got a closer look. He gave a nervous chuckle. "He'll be back tonight," he said in a tone that desiring itself to be false. My stomach fluttered in fear. Bessie, the dairy cow, gave an agonizing moo. I could tell that something was bothering her. Uncle Jeremy turned with a sad look on his face. He took to his feet and walked his way over to the cow. When he was feet away from her, he took to one knee. "It's already begun." I looked over his shoulder, and my mouth dropped when I saw the sight of gore that still torments me to this day. Bessie's udders were mutilated, flesh hanging off of each of the protrusions, and flies feasting on her fresh wounds as blood mixed with milk. "Poor Bessie," Uncle Jeremy said. I could tell that seeing his cow suffer made him emotional. I moved to comfort him, but before my hand could grace his shoulder, he stood. He unholstered the Magnum and pointed it at Bessie's head. One shot rang out as every bird in the vicinity took flight. Bessie was dead. She now lay in a pool of blood and brain matter. Uncle Jeremy wiped away some tears before turning around and walking briskly back to the cabin. "Come on, kid. We have to get ready." I knew that we were heading for some kind of battle. When the night fell on the cabin that day, Uncle Jeremy and I did not talk. We had barricaded ourselves and all of the livestock inside the little cabin. A total of 22 chickens, 7 goats, and a variety of domesticated geese. He'd thrust a rifle in my hand and give me instructions on how to shoot, though he said not to use it unless something happened to him. For the most part, the night was quiet. The chickens and geese had roosted for the night, and the goats had lost the excitement of being in a new environment. They now huddled together in a corner of the living room. I would almost say it was peaceful, until every animal began screeching at the top of their lungs. The birds flocked around the house. The goats erupted in a panic, running around trying to find any hiding place they could. Most now cowered under the dining room table. Almost as quickly as the commotion began, it all quieted down. I looked at Uncle Jeremy in bewilderment, but the look in his eye told me he'd seen all of this before. His eyes trained on the door. A familiar sound slid across the other side. It was the scratching that we'd heard the night before. In the same fashion, the scratching intensified before it erupted into a frenzy of banging. I eyed the door as the latch struggled to keep whatever was on the other side out. A voice soon followed suit. "Jeremy, Jeremy, Jeremy." Oh, Uncle Jeremy. It sounded like me. For some reason, whatever was on the other side was using my voice as bait. The voice changed to that of Uncle Jeremy's. "Marcus! Open the door, Marcus!" Uncle Jeremy looked at me before raising his revolver to the door. One shot rang out, and the sound of something hitting the floor was evident from our vantage point. My uncle took to his feet and made his way over to the door, revolver at the ready. I wanted to tell him to stay put, but couldn't find the courage. He opened the top latch, followed by the bottom. The door cautiously creaked open, and Uncle Jeremy peered out of the small crack. I will remember the words that came from his mouth for the rest of my life. Oh, shit. Suddenly, a clawed hand reached through the small crack in the door and pulled him from the comforts of the cabin. I heard screams, but wasn't sure if they belonged to Uncle Jeremy or the thing impersonating him. Everything went quiet, and I wrestled with the idea of seeing what the outcome of the skirmish was. Just then, I heard a voice that brought me a mountain of relief. "It's okay, kid. I got him." I heard Uncle Jeremy grunt as he seemingly took to his feet from the other side of the door. But as the door slowly swung open, my heart dropped. It wasn't my uncle. It was the creature that had taken him. Its body was tall and skinny, its skin pale, and its face, well, it had no face, just a plain identity. But as it stood there and turned in my direction, a mouth began to part. skin sticking to its upper and lower jaws like large wads of gum until they eventually gave way to sharp teeth. It spoke one more time in my uncle's voice. "Marcus." It took to a sprint, and when it was just feet from me, a revolver round spat out. The creature flopped to the floor in a green pool of blood. Standing at the door was my injured Uncle Jeremy. After that night, I had no problems following any of Uncle Jeremy's rules, no matter how arbitrary they were. We worked his homestead all summer, and I never mentioned his name again. I was never one for the rules, but in this instance, I was not going to summon another creature. Although I would see things dart beyond the tree line, I never mentioned them. At the end of the summer, I was adamant that I would never spend another day with my Uncle Jeremy, a model citizen through and through. 10 years later, I received word that my great Uncle Jeremy had passed. At first, I suspected old age. He was ancient after all, but my father informed me that it had been a bear attack that ended his life. He was a hard son of a bitch, and a hard son of a bitch deserved to go out like a man, I thought to myself. But then, I started to question if a bear was really the culprit. My thoughts turned to the creature that had once called from the other side of the cabin walls. I thought of its blank face and its jagged claws. The day before I was set to leave for his funeral, I received a letter in the mail. The address it was sent from was Uncle Jeremy's P.O. box. I'd assumed he'd left something in his will for me, but as I unsealed the letter, I found a single piece of paper. Written in blood was the same circle Uncle Jeremy and I had found carved on the other side of the cabin walls, the lines drawn across it just as jagged. I looked to the top of the circle, the same 2 names were written out. Only this time, one was crossed out, Uncle Jeremy's. At that second, I heard faint scratching from the other side of my house in Idaho. I don't know how, but one of them found me. Thanks so much for tuning in. I really appreciate every single one of you. If you haven't already, please give the video a like and hit that subscribe button. We're aiming for 1,000 subscribers, and I know we can get there soon with your support.